Anguirus, Godzilla's oldest foe and probably the most important kaiju in all of history other than Godzilla himself. Being Godzilla's first foe, these two together helped propel the idea of kaiju versus as a genre beyond, well, the standard kaiju genre that it already was. While in the past many movies had shown that monsters meeting and battling had been very successful, with Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and in King Kong, you first have King Kong showing down with the Meat Eater and King Kong proving victorious. However, this battle was actually relatively brief in the overall span of the movie, and wasn't really a major focus. Godzilla Raids Again, and specifically Godzilla and Anguirus' rivalry in that movie, was important in propelling that idea forward as being the basis of the entire movie for kaiju specifically. Something that I feel should have been obvious that giant monsters fighting is pretty awesome and people like to see. But back then, it was a new concept. So let's explore this armored titan. Wrong titan. But the Attack on Titan video is coming. I literally just finished watching Attack on Titan for the first time. We started watching it a couple of months ago, and I really love that series. We've got a whole lot of videos planned talking about it because my first time watching it, I kind of archived everything for it, and yeah, it's gonna be something. If you guys are looking forward to that, feel free to subscribe for more. Now, back to Anguirus. So, what is he? Well, he's a dinosaur, an Ankylosaurus specifically. Yes, my stunning powers of deduction and observation at work. If you can't tell, that was my forehead hitting my palm. On a more serious note, much like Godzilla, he has managed to survive since the age of the dinosaurs, only to be reawakened and mutated by nuclear testing. The original is specifically stated to have come from Siberia. It is quite fitting that the T-Rex and the Ankylosaurus rivalry spanned all those millions of years, and came back when both are mutant irradiated monster abominations of mankind's creation. Poetic. A tenacious fighter and Godzilla's greatest ally, as well as his first foe, I present to you Anguirus, the armored terror and kaiju companion #1. First appearing in Godzilla Raids Again, Anguirus' introduction has him already being engaged in battle with Godzilla, being observed by 2 JSDF pilots. When their rivalry moves much closer to Osaka, they try to protect the city by having a blackout. In a way, not that dissimilar from being an actual defense used by cities to protect against bombings during the war. This is done so the two monsters won't notice the city and will simply harmlessly pass it by. However, a gas fire is ignited, and the two monsters are attracted to the light and begin battling in Osaka. While Anguirus initially displays some resilience against Godzilla's incandescent light, remember at this time the incandescent light was Godzilla's primary attack, as the atomic ray hadn't really matured yet. He gained that in Godzilla vs. King Kong a few years later. However, he is eventually overwhelmed and delivered a swift, fatal bite to the throat, and is overturned, falling into the moat around Osaka Castle, and with his soft, less armored underbelly exposed, the incandescent light is capable of setting him aflame along with Osaka itself. He became the first in a long line of kaiju to perish at the claws and specifically breath of the King of the Monsters. However, the only one to perish before the incandescent light itself. For all of the silliness that is really ascribed to Godzilla Raids Again, particularly because of the pretty goofy fighting, there are still very clear threads to the nuclear and specifically war-torn origins of the creatures in the movie, which is something of an unfortunate stigma the Showa-era films have overall. Something I do look forward to exploring later on. However, that is all for the first generation Anguirus. A second generation Anguirus would actually make itself known 20 years after the original was smote by Godzilla. This time he would actually appear as a friend of Godzilla, this being the same Godzilla that previously game-ended a prior member of his kind. On Monster Island, Godzilla had overheard the Space Hunter Nebula aliens were plotting to take over the world, and so he enlisted Anguirus' help to go to Japan to figure out what was going on. This, even without showing anything more, displays a very long history and trust between the two of them over those 20 years that we didn't really get to see in the movies. Both with Anguirus following Godzilla's instructions and Godzilla trusting him to actually go to Japan, a place which has shown itself to be hostile to kaiju. After Anguirus does reach Japan, the JSDF engage him in battle, and Anguirus returns to Monster Island to tell Godzilla what's been happening. and specifically ask Godzilla for his help in facing the alien monsters that have been summoned. In the final fight, it is Godzilla and Anguirus versus Gigan and King Ghidorah, as well as the Nebulan aliens Godzilla Tower in Monsterland, which has a laser version approximation of Godzilla's atomic ray, something that with Gigan's help with several repeated blows from his hooked claw hands and the, of course, laser breath from the Godzilla Tower, is capable of knocking Godzilla out for a brief moment. This leaves Anguirus alone against, well, the Godzilla Tower, Gigan, and King Ghidorah. Despite the odds, he fights tenaciously, and with some helpful humans destroying the top of the Godzilla Tower, allowing Godzilla to recover and re-engage in battle, the two are able to turn the tide of the battle and drive off the invading space monsters. However, despite his history being known as Godzilla's steadfast ally throughout the Showa era, he mostly appeared in a lot of cameos throughout the timeline up until Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, where in another alien plot to take over the world, a fake Godzilla, which was Mechagodzilla in disguise, was dispatched, and Anguirus, knowing that this was not actually his friend Godzilla, engaged the alien space robot in battle. Though he was swiftly and soundly defeated by Mechagodzilla, with Mechagodzilla prying his jaws open and breaking his jaw, being one of the few kaiju to cause another kaiju to bleed, Anguirus was instrumental in revealing the true nature of the alien invader to the helpful humans, who were able to discover it was made of space titanium. Even in defeat, Anguirus still helps. After that fight with Mechagodzilla, he did end up getting better, as he did appear later in Destroy All Monsters, the latest movie set in the Showa timeline. He, along with the rest of Earth's monsters, grouped up in a final showdown with King Ghidorah on Monster Island, ultimately proving instrumental in taking down the three-headed terror by taking out one of his three heads, Godzilla taking out another, and unfortunately Minilla taking out the central. The steadfast and tenacious ally of Godzilla, the one whom actually managed to humanize Godzilla the most throughout the Showa era, helped showing us a side of him that we never really would have gotten to see otherwise. From another member of his kind being his first foe, to the second becoming his greatest ally, he had really a lot going for him in the Showa run, despite the somewhat seen as silly incarnations of the character, especially them talking in Godzilla vs. Gigan. It is also important to note that he was not Godzilla's first ally, that was Rodan and specifically Mothra. However, he was the most notable and most frequent, at least back in the Showa era. We're skipping over the Heisei era, as unfortunately he did not have any incarnations in the Heisei era timeline, so we're skipping directly to the Millennium era. There actually were two movies, at least, well, three, where he was slated to have an appearance. In the original Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, he was actually supposed to have, one, a scene where he fought Kiryu in battle, or another scene where instead of the Kami boss that is shown, that was actually supposed to be Anguirus. However, both of these were independent ideas and both were independently scrapped. He also was supposed to be in Godzilla Tokyo SOS, but this was again also scrapped. Keeping in with the scrapped moments, he was originally slated to appear in GMK, as the original title of the movie was Godzilla X Varan, Baragon, and Anguirus. Giant monsters all out attack. Yeah, poor Anguirus. So his only appearance was in the Millennium era in Godzilla Final Wars. Unfortunately, we don't get to see much of his personality, as throughout the entire movie, he is being controlled by the Exilians. Though a very notable fact about this is that Godzilla only spares 3 kaiju in the entire movie. Everything else he obliterates. Those 3 being Rodan, King Caesar, and Anguirus himself. It is also confirmed that the monsters' histories in this movie are very similar to those of especially their Showa incarnations, meaning Godzilla and Anguirus have a very long history together as friends, hence why he didn't destroy them, because those were his Showa allies. And he knew them to be good monsters and they were simply doing the bidding of the aliens. He actively showed restraint. He actually may or may not have had an appearance in the MonsterVerse movie King of the Monsters, as a skeleton, or at least a creature of his same species. The reason why we don't know what this or not is actually the director of the movie has said maybe it is, maybe it isn't, it's not exactly clear, but looking at the untextured picture, yeah, it's pretty obvious that's supposed to be, or at least supposed to be, evoking Anguirus. It's a lot harder to see just in static pictures of the movie because it really isn't that clear. But if you're watching the actual scene, which is probably up right now, just going down in slow-mo, you can kind of see what the skeleton is. Yeah, it's a really cool idea, but yeah, yeah. He had a brief mention in the Netflix anime trilogy, but we're not really going to mention that as it was taken out by Hedora, as was Rodan. And we're stripping straight over to Godzilla Singular Point, which introduced a very different take on Anguirus. As in this movie, all of the kaiju are extra-dimensional whatever the hecks. Departing very drastically from his origin, he's a rather curious and in fact somewhat playful creature, being rather inquisitive about the environment and rather docile unless provoked. He even somewhat amusingly plays with the downed body of Jet Jaguar after he's been somewhat defeated, though he can be quite vicious and violent once provoked, lashing out at even just inanimate objects, not just creatures and people. A very unique ability this version has is that it can briefly see into the future with precognition and vibrate the spikes on its body to deflect and even reflect projectiles back at the originator. He's also much smaller than other kaiju in Singular Point, much like the Rodan, though he is a singular member of his own species, quote unquote, and sadly does not survive, as a harpoon to the neck is really all it took to take him down. And that is all for Anguirus. This is a rather short video because sadly there isn't really much to talk about with him. He didn't really have a whole lot of appearances, and the vast bulk of them really are back in the Showa era, and were kind of a lot of glorified cameos. But what do you think of Anguirus? Would you like to see him in the Monsterverse? Would you like to see maybe more separate Toho-made films, maybe with him in it? I know I would. I'm actually a big fan of Anguirus because back when I used to play Godzilla Unleashed on the Wii with my brother would pick Destroya, I'd pick Anguirus and just clown on him all the time with Anguirus. If you guys haven't done so already, comment your thoughts below, leave a like on the video, and subscribe for more. Next week, we are going to have the Attack on Titan video out. Yeah, it's been fun. I'll see you guys next time, and long live the Kaiju King.